So Shireen, a few months ahead of the World Cup, what type of press coverage can we expect during the 6 weeks of that tournament?
I think one of the things that we need to look at is the way in which journalists will act, the way they will practice. And unfortunately, Qatar is not a country in which freedom of expression and freedom of the press is greatly allowed, despite the fact that Al Jazeera's headquarters are in Doha. I think we'll find very packaged products. I think we'll find packaged articles and reporting. And I think there'll be a tremendous focus on player profiles, even more so. And we won't see generally criticisms of anything around Doha or Qatar. We won't at all.
Right, and so I mean, there's out and out criticism, but then there's also just an honest look at the community. Like if we if the Super Bowl was in Detroit, like we would have to talk about gentrification because that's happening in Detroit. So you're saying even stories like that might get too close to the line and kind of spoil the sports washing party that they're trying to throw?
Yeah, because that's exactly it, the sports washing party, which is exactly what Qatar wants. And they're not interested in any criticisms and anything that have come up before. They are saying that we're dealing with them. They're managing them. When in reality, they haven't been. In 2021, 2 Norwegian journalists were arrested for investigating human rights abuses against stadium workers. And very recently, 60 laborers were detained and then deported for protesting the lack of payment. So there are things that are happening, but very few mainstream media outlets are reporting. And already if you see the reports coming out about sports washing are minimal. They're not. It's not getting the attention that it needs to get. And there's a reason for that, because leading up to it, I think the rights holders don't want to engage in this type of fight because then FIFA will be like, sorry, you're out. And it's connected to money.
Yes. Now, I understand that, soccer is the world's most popular sport. And there is a large segment of that audience that is like, you know what? That's fine. All I want to know is who scored and why. All I want to know is who had possession. All I wanted to know was the percentage of corner kicks that came from this guy versus that guy. But as a broader audience, like, what do you lose out on when all of the journalism focuses on what happened on the field and you don't get these stories about the context in which this is all taking place?
I think that's probably one of the things that I struggle with the most. I feel like viewers, I feel like the public, it's the world's game, have a right to understand context. And if you report solely on the World Cup based on statistics and match reports, you're losing out on a much more organic picture. What is happening? Where was the World Cup hosted? Like when we talk about the 1936 Nazi games, I mean, it's very important to understand what was happening, the agenda that Adolf Hitler had, the genocidal, propaganda that he was peddling. That's important to that context and time. How are we supposed to move forward and be better if we're not incorporating all these things? And I mean, I will point fingers to fellow journalists. Right. Like, are you going to take responsibility for what you're about to do? Because sport washing is also propelled by media.
Right. Well, imagine trying to tell the story of the 1968 Olympics and you look at the final results in the men's 200 meters and it's self-evident that Tommy Smith ran 19.83 seconds, which is an amazing time even today. But imagine if you just said, ooh, 1983, that's impressive, and just left it there. Right? And if you didn't explore beyond that, you're kind of missing a big piece of the story. Now, do journalists have any recourse in terms of being able to tell honest stories from this tournament without courting serious trouble?
To be really honest with you, if it was me, hypothetically speaking, I would say no. I wouldn't do it as a safety precaution. And also, if you work freelance, you don't have an institution to support you and bail you out if you need it. So there's that. Those that are practicing journalists or photojournalists, video journalists that are freelance, they don't have anyone backing them. Like, why would they go and do that? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I wouldn't. Personally, it's something that I would think about a lot before going. But then I would look at, are there other ways that we can tell stories? There's a broader community that you mentioned there. Women, other marginalized communities. Like, for one, the queer community certainly can't be reported on because most of them are not public because you're not allowed to be gay in Qatar, and it comes up with 7 years of imprisonment. So, I mean, there's so many things happening. Even the fact that FIFA can't organize what's called a safe house. Usually in World Cup host cities, they have safe houses or diversity houses for different types of communities. They're not doing that in Qatar because of the, basically the conversations, and the organizing committee didn't find it necessary or didn't find it that it worked with conjunction of local culture, which basically means they're homophobic.
Right.
So, I mean, these are things that we need to chronicle. These are things that we need to keep track of.
This idea that regimes and people who we would otherwise view as bad actors can use sports to launder their image, like this is not new. No. This has been happening, and even in recent years, it's kind of been operating in the background of a lot of these big events. Why do you think that the term sports washing has emerged or reemerged, and why is this issue so hot these days, like in the last 18 months or so?
First of all, the term sports washing was coined, and with a lot of social issues, we don't have the language for it. Now the language is there, and that helps with education. It helps with disseminating all the information we need to. And I think very specifically, it's about the fact that people are learning to be more comfortable to call it out and not be proverbial good guys reporting on bad things. Like they're getting involved in saying, listen, this is what we see. This isn't good. But they're pulling away from that for Qatar, which is my problem. With Russia, it was a lot easier to be like, okay, these are the bad guys, right? And that's a bit of the problem here, is that I'm not saying that Qataris are all bad guys, because of course people everywhere are wonderful and people everywhere can be good or bad. But the difficulty is this situation it stinks. It stinks for many different reasons. Like I'm concerned about marginalized communities going to Qatar. What'll it be like for them? What's the impact that this World Cup will have? Logistically, they're not prepared. I'm worried about the reported over 6,000 people that have died. Who's going to be accountable for those deaths?
Yes.
Those laborers, mostly South Asian men. Now, there are reports of that. Human Rights Watch has been reporting on it. There's a lot of human rights organizations. But human rights organizations shouldn't be responsible for the reporting that mainstream media is doing. And that's essentially what's happening.
Before we go, before the end of this year and looking into next year, like where do you see this issue heading?
Well, I mean, I think that logistically, if we're looking at Qatar 2022, it is going to be a disaster. They started talking about making tent cities because the hotels that they promised will be built are not built yet. I mean, we've also heard about, it's a mess. And so people are trying to figure out the Qatar organizing committee doesn't even have, placement intact yet for journalists. It's a lot. And I think part of the thing here is to really recognize that we should keep watching, even those that aren't journalists, even those in broad media. There are ways to tie these discussions in, people that teach sports media, people that are teaching, on global affairs generally. This is tying in so many things other than sports. In my opinion, sports is one of the easiest things you can use to sort of renovate your image. And that's what's happening. But we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep writing about it. We have to keep having discussions such as this. So when you are watching those games, because we will, we're not going to boycott the World Cup because I'm going to be sitting alone in my basement not watching the games.
Right.
But to keep it in mind, because there is a way to support sport, the purity of sport, and be critical at the same time.
So tent cities in a hot climate, you're saying the World Cup might also turn into Fire Festival.
Oh, man. Maybe there'll be a Netflix documentary about it in a couple of years. We don't know.
We will see. As always, one of my favorite people in this business and on this planet, Shireen Ahmed, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Morgan.